Welcome everyone to today's program. I am Tamara Rosen with Becker's Healthcare. The program will begin with a presentation and will be followed by a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the presentation by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. Our presenter will attempt to answer as many questions as he can during the time we have and will follow up on questions he does not have the opportunity to address. You will receive an email within about a week following the webinar that will include instructions for how you can download a copy of the presentation. You will also receive a follow-up email shortly after completion of the program. You can submit your feedback or any additional questions at that time. This email will not include the presentation. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Dr. Oliver Karaz is president and founder of ZocDoc. Oliver is the most recent doctor in a 300-year family tradition. Over the course of his wide-ranging career, Oliver has accrued comprehensive experience affecting change and building efficiency in large-scale healthcare organizations using information technology. Prior to ZocDoc, Oliver was an associate principal at the global management consulting firm McKinsey & Company. During his 7-year tenure at McKinsey, Oliver developed and implemented new patient utilization models for the national health services of a number of governments and major hospital chains. In 1994, Oliver built and sold his first business, a forerunner of early internet software. He later became a resident doctor at the clinic of Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, where he earned a medical degree and a doctorate in neuroscience. Oliver also has a master's degree in philosophy from the Jesuit College of Philosophy in Munich. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Dr. Karaz to begin today's presentation.
Well, hello everyone. Good to be here, and thank you so much, Tamara, for your kind introduction, and Becker's for letting me talk about who's raising your patients' expectations today. Now, we all healthcare professionals, and I think we all have our own experiences and anecdotes about what patients really expect from us. And I personally certainly thought I had it all figured out when I started ZocDoc 8 years ago. But the chance I had here to study it scientifically through individual observations and experiments left me surprised many times. It was not what I thought at all. And what I want to do today is share some of these learnings with you. I want to start by making a statement that might be controversial. The patient experience is actually the most important question in healthcare today. And this is why I say this. This is the Toluteca Bridge in Honduras. It's a massive bridge designed to withstand any hurricane, and it did. But it's still completely useless because the river moved from under it. I'm a trained physician, not a meteorologist, but it's clear to me that a lot of us are focused on this Category 5 hurricane that's coming at us from Washington, D.C., and that's called healthcare reform. That's a great problem to be focused on, but it's probably only one of the problems we need to solve, one part of it. And maybe it's even an entirely wrong problem, because what we see happening is that this river of patient expectations is moving away from under the bridge at a speed that's completely unparalleled through forces that are both faster, more fundamental, and more foreign to us as healthcare professionals than anything we're used to, and that any health reform could ever be. And that force is technology. Let me demonstrate what I mean with that. And for that, a little bit of time travel. This is 2005, St. Peter's Square. These are the faithful assembled, waiting for the inauguration of Pope Benedict. This is a cross-section of the general population, all ages, men, women, all education levels, all income levels. These are your patients. And I want to draw special attention to the Motorola Razr in the lower right-hand corner. Now fast forward, 2013, same place, similar occasion, Pope Francis. Can you spot the 5,000 differences? What has happened is that technology now permeates your patients' lives. It's completely changed the expectations around immediacy, choice, and personalization. That's the force that's moving our river. The reason why I'm talking about this is because my company has been focused on these forces for the last 8 years. We started ZocDoc to be the beginning of a better healthcare experience, to give power to the patient, to give them immediacy and choice and personalization, because that's what they're trained to expect in every aspect of their life, and healthcare is not and should not be any different from that. Now, for those of you who are not very familiar with ZocDoc, just a little bit of context. So we got started 8 years ago when my co-founder ruptured his eardrum and couldn't find a doctor for 4 days while being in agonizing pain. So we took this concept of being a beginning of a better healthcare experience very, very literally. We started with access. You can come to ZocDoc and you can find a doctor that's nearby, that takes your insurance, and you can book an appointment with that doctor 24/7. We have since done other things and innovated in the wide space between the doctor and the patient, but I don't want to talk about us too much. The only thing that I really want to point out, and it's crucial to understanding it, is on this slide, where you can see these time slots, where it says 9 a.m., 10:30 a.m., 11:15. These are the real-time availabilities of these doctors. You can just go, click on one of these time slots, and book an appointment. What it does from the patient's perspective is obviously makes it incredibly convenient, but it transforms it from a business perspective into an e-commerce experience. What it does, it makes behavior measurable, where you can run experiments and you can see how different variants of the web page actually influence patient choice. And I'll talk about this and how it allows you to capture what the patients actually want. Not what they tell you they want or what you think they want, but what they actually want, as you can see by observing how they actually behave. And if we ourselves want to behave more like e-commerce, it means that we have to have measurements in place, and that we need to size the price, know what winning actually looks like. So I want to start with the measurements. And we're lucky in the sense that measuring how well you're meeting someone's expectation is already common practice everywhere else but healthcare. It's done in other industries where every single company does it, and they use something that's called a Net Promoter Score. So I'd like you to give me some feedback right now. Can please everyone who knows their own Net Promoter Score send us a message right now through the platform. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to do that. All right. So if you didn't send us yours, when you get out of this webinar, go talk to your chief marketing officer and ask them what your Net Promoter Score is. And if they don't know, then start measuring it now. Because what it refers to is how likely one of your patients is going to recommend you and your services to a friend or family member. And the shameful piece about this is that in healthcare, a lot of times, the biggest players actually have negative Net Promoter Scores. Now you can see this here. Cigna, United, Aetna have an average Net Promoter Score of -20, which means people actively say, whatever you do, don't do business with my provider. Companies like that don't survive in the wild. The only other category of companies that's so negative are cable companies. Most companies, have Net Promoter Scores between 30 and 50. You'll see Facebook at 38, Netflix at 50, Google at 53. And some experiences delight. Amazon and Apple are in the category of their own, and we feel very that we're in their peer group. But that's not an end in its own right. When you do exceed the patient's expectations, something very interesting happens. And it's called virality. It should be very intuitive for us as healthcare professionals, but it actually, plays out in the numbers. I want to show you this with ZocDoc's own patient adoption. What you see on this slide, and I hope it's easy to see, is our patient adoption. And this is a chart back from 2008. 2010, when we had actuals from 2008 to 2010, and we're measuring sort of the uptake, and we predicted, maybe overly optimistic and starry-eyed, what our adoption would be all the way into 2015, and that's what's in gray, and the ramp up. Now, let me show you what actually happened. What you see here is Doctor's actual adoption data, and it's a hyper-exponential curve that's fueled entirely through word of mouth. I don't want to take all the credit for that, of course. We work with great partners along the way that helped us to deliver the actual experience and clinical care. And some of them are on the slide, but obviously there are many more that we have to be thankful to. But an essential part why this curve looks the way it does is our relentless obsession to learn from and about the patient. Not only asking them what they want or having our own gut feel about it, but by measuring what's actually happening and how they're behaving. Now, all these measurements, all of that work, and every individual learning together created a mental map for us where we can figure out together with our partners where that river is actually going, where that patient is going. And there is a video that I would love for you to see. I can't show it right now because the technology doesn't actually support videos, but I'll send you a link to it later on. What it shows is a 1-year-old that's playing around with an iPad and swiping left and right and up and down, and anyone who has kids knows they love to do that. And what you see next is that this kid is trying to do the same thing with a magazine. Swiping on the magazine, but it's not quite working the way the iPad is working. And I think all too often, our patients feel a little bit like this when they interact with healthcare. It's just not working the way they expect it to work. It's not working the way that it works in every other aspect of their lives. And that's why it's not correct to benchmark yourself against other healthcare companies. You need to benchmark yourself against the totality of the patient experience, just like the magazine publisher can benchmark themselves against other magazines. They need to benchmark themselves against the iPad. So with that in mind, it becomes obvious that you need to look at how consumers actually spend their time. And we've done some research on that. And what you can see is, and this is just in hours per year, what do consumers do? Well, they spend 1,200 hours roughly on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media. They spend 870 hours on iPhone apps, 550 hours streaming Netflix, and they spend 365 hours shopping online. And the providers of all of these services have an intrinsic economic incentive to make sure that these experiences are instantaneous, that they're personalized, and the marketplace as such creates choice by definition. So these are the experiences you're up against, and these are the time that patients spend with these experiences, being trained to expect all these things. Now let me show you how much time you have to shape the patient's expectations through healthcare. So on the same scale, this is how much time they spend as a patient. So 52 hours searching for health info online. An hour and a half in your waiting room. Less than an hour, and I personally find that shocking, actual interaction with your doctor in the exam room. And so the only thing in healthcare that is in the same order of magnitude as the consumer experience is how long it takes them to see you once they've negotiated an appointment with your call center or receptionist. It takes them days, and days until they get to see you. And in some ways, I think you should be sending thank you notes to Facebook and Twitter, because at least it keeps them busy while they're waiting to get in. But I'm being facetious. Obviously, on a more sober business level, this is exactly the polar opposite of the experience of immediacy that patients get everywhere else. So So let's talk about immediacy. It's not a secret that we live in an in-demand, get-it-now kind of world. Actually, we have lived in this world for quite a while now. Going back all the way to when Netflix started back in 1997, way before Google or Facebook were on the map. And what I think is that they showed an incredible foresight. They could have easily named this company DVDs by mail or something like this, but they didn't. They named it Netflix. Why? Because they knew that immediacy is the future. And that at some point, they'd have to cannibalize their own DVD services through streaming, which is much more immediate. And when Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, actually pulled the trigger on that in 2010 and separated out the DVD from the streaming services, he was heavily criticized. But as it turns out, 5 years later, Netflix has 57 million subscribers, of which only 10% actually still use the DVD service. Pardon me. And that number is dwindling by the day. So Netflix certainly pioneered understanding of how important immediacy is. And they've been joined by a bunch of other companies that have created the on-demand economy. Now, one more recent example is Instacart. For anyone who isn't familiar with Instacart, it's a service where you can go, pardon me, where you can go online and shop across multiple different grocery stores and get your groceries delivered to you within an hour. So if there are any working parents listening, I myself am a working father of two beautiful 5-year-old twin girls, and it's been a lifesaver for me a number of times. I really heavily encourage you to give them a try, and I'm not getting paid to say that, just my personal experience. But what's interesting about Instacart is that another company, Whole Foods, which is a traditional retailer operating at a completely different scale, partnered up with Instacart. Pardon me. And why did they do that? They did that because they wanted their consumers to have the digital experience they wanted, the convenience they wanted, while at the same time being able to focus on what Whole Foods does best, which is delivering healthy products. Now, obviously, the thing with immediacy in healthcare is that we all know it's hard. We get reminded of that every time Merit Hawkins puts out one of its access surveys. And, what this shows you is actually the latest Merit Hawkins mystery shopping survey, where they're trying, to get into a doctor by picking up the phone and starting to call numbers. And you can see how much time it actually takes a patient to, go in and see a doctor and sit across from them and get care. And, some cities do well. Dallas takes 5 days until you can see a doctor. Some cities take up to 66 days, like Boston. That's obviously the opposite of the experience that Instacart is providing. Now, anyone who actually runs a provider organization might say, yeah, that's the experienced wait time, Oliver. But in reality, there's always capacity because there's 20% of appointments that get canceled, no-showed, rescheduled in the last minute. And you know what? You're absolutely right. But that is the hidden supply. That's the supply that patients cannot find with a phone. But what I'd like to show you numbers that demonstrate what happens once you uncover that hidden supply for patients and you get to see the true preferences. And this is again ZocDoc data that essentially shows the time between the patient coming to ZocDoc and booking to the time that the appointment is actually happening. And what we see is that the typical appointment happens on the same day, within 24 hours. And the vast majority of appointments is booked within 3 days. And only less than 10% are booked out 19 days or more in the future, with 19 days being the average number of days that people have to wait, according to the Merit Hawkins study, to see a primary care doctor. So you can tell that only 10% of people actually want to have the experience that we consider average today. And the vast majority wants a very different experience that requires us to really uncover the hidden supply to deliver. So this is something how we fail our patients in their desire for immediacy right from the get-go. And the situation is equally dire when we think about what happens when they actually try to reach us. So, the typical doctor's office is only open during business hours, from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. But as it turns out, 45% of appointments that we see are booked outside of business hours. So we're making it extra hard for them to even get into the queue to wait for 66 days. Pardon me. Let's move on to choice. And that's a particularly important one because I think it goes against our deepest intuitions. Particularly as leaders of provider organizations, because if we're honest, we want to own the patient. And the tough news about this is that the patient doesn't want to be owned. In fact, if you look at the crowd at St. Peter's Square, if those were US patients, 60% would be up for grabs. This is what PwC found in one of their studies. People just want to have access to the market where they can pick based on their own preferences. I actually want to do another quick field study here. And I think we have enough people on the phone for that. Just message me if you have ever used AOL to access the internet. I'll give you a second to do that. All right, answer's still coming in, but now please message me again if you still use AOL to access the internet. All right, the rate of messages is much, much lower. It's a funny phenomenon, right? Like on the internet, walled gardens like our AOL just don't work. They just don't work on the internet. Why? Because consumers know that there's a whole world behind the wall. We don't want to have AOL's recipe site or AOL's news site. We want to have the best recipe site and the best news site that's out there. And the interesting piece is, on the internet, this instinct to own is also completely unnecessary. The internet abounds with examples of how you can succeed while still embracing your customers and the patient's choice. I think a great parallel for healthcare is actually the travel industry. So, executives, the travel executives need to fill their planes, and they need to attract a lot of passengers to do that. Now, if you look what's happening here, only 5% of their seats are booked over the phone. Those are people that either don't have the internet, and that's quite frankly a minority, or people that have unique questions or very complex itineraries. Another 35% is booked over their website, AmericanAirlines.com, AA.com, but only a very small fraction of their traffic are actually bookings. Most of them are people just checking their flight status, their loyalty program, or checking in, those types of things. And the vast majority of their passengers come through other channels. And the interesting thing here is that Expedia, Orbitz, Kayak, they offer convenience, they offer enormous selection, and in fact, they're competing on these factors. And it leaves American Airlines to focus on what they're doing best, which is dealing with planes and schedules. Now, in healthcare, I have good news for you. What we've actually observed is that loyalty is a built-in phenomenon in healthcare. So, a couple observations on that. This page that you see right now is the medical team that a patient gets once they have booked. And 3 out of 4 patients go back and book with exactly the same doctors that they have seen once before. There's also another indicator that is a little bit more subtle. But to give you background, we know that patients prefer doctors who have availability on Saturdays, Sundays, early mornings, late nights, which makes sense, right? That is more convenient, fits more in your lifestyle. But what was surprising to me is that these doctors get a higher share of appointments even when the patient books for a regular weekday appointment, like a Tuesday at 11 a.m. Because the patient knows that they are going to pick their long-term doctor and they prefer one that's available over the weekend, even if they're booking for a Tuesday at 11 a.m. They think, I'm going to book this guy because next time I'm back, I'm going to see them on the weekend, right? And this just shows that they want to have these ongoing relationships, which means that we can give choice and still establish a long-term relationship with the patient. So on to the last point, personalization. Now this may seem the least obvious to you from your own personal experience, and that's because personalization really works best when it goes unnoticed by the consumer. You may not really appreciate how the world around you changes in very nuanced and subtle ways to accommodate your needs and desires until you pause to think about that. But maybe the most obvious example is Amazon.com. They recommend products for you, and it's not an accident. One of these products is something that you've been thinking about buying anyway, and you were interested in. In fact, it's exactly the opposite of an accident. They have a huge data science team where they investigate based on all their data on purchases from others and purchases from you, what the most likely product is that you want to see. And one of 3 purchases on Amazon is actually based on their data and their algorithms. Now this works so well that Procter & Gamble has actually set up shop on Amazon premises to understand better what the customers want and to fulfill these needs based on the data and analytics that Amazon can provide. And it's led to Procter & Gamble really doubling down and dominating all the categories they compete in Amazon. Now in healthcare, something very similar is possible. And I like to call that evidence-based messaging. These are a couple of emails that we tend to send out to patients. And evidence-based medicine is very much like evidence-based medicine, where in evidence-based medicine, you find which molecules change our metabolism. And we can do all these experiments to see what works and which population and what the dosage should be and how long you should give it for. And we can make sure that patients get better. In evidence-based messaging, we can figure out which messages impact our motivation. And the beautiful thing here is that we have all the ingredients of a scientific experiment. We can vary the inputs. These are just 2 out of literally millions of messages we send out every month. And we can observe the outcome. We can see whether the patient actually acted on it, whether they clicked on this, whether they booked an appointment, and ultimately showed up at the doctor's office. And now, we have the data to go in and see how all the different demographics react to the different messages. So a young invincible man will react differently than a 35-year-old mother of 2 or a retiree. And what you realize that in one instance, maybe I need to appeal to their competitive juices. If you don't do this, you're the bottom 3 of the population distribution. In another case, maybe I want to explain that this is what's going on in your body, and this is why you should act now. And maybe in some other instances, I can just be assertive and say, you know what? This is the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force recommendation. Go and do it now. And we can actually match the right message based on the patient's age, gender, demographics, income, medical history, and other factors. And it gives a very powerful tool if you think about anyone who really feels accountable or maybe is financially accountable for the risk of the patient in a patient population. Well, this is a way for you to nudge the patient to do what is right for them clinically, to have the best possible outcome, and also make sure that they're doing what's right for the system, based on the efficient use of resources. So how do we put all of this together into a strategy that isn't just reactive to what is going on, but really positions us to take advantage of all these changes that are happening? How does it help us to stay one step ahead? So going back to the Tolteca Bridge, first and maybe the most important thing is to keep in mind what we're actually focused on. There are so many distracting priorities out there, but nothing is moving faster than this river. It can make everything else we do completely useless and ineffective. And then secondly, it's important to remember that there are great success stories out there from other industries that have done exactly the same changes. Food lovers, for example, can now get their groceries delivered easily and digitally at their doorstep, and get exactly what they need. Travelers can see the entire market and they can book an itinerary with confidence. And we all get smarter shopping experiences that are based on our individual needs and preferences. These examples translate into healthcare, and the unifying piece and what I'm really excited about in our partnerships and in these examples that you saw on the prior page is that they're forming much more of a nimble raft that can go through the bends of the river and make sure that we come out in a good place together with the patient, versus forming a solid, massive bridge that is completely inflexible. And that's the power of listening to the patient. I think we're all going to be apprentices of this future of healthcare. And that's why I'm personally excited to start this conversation with you here today, because I want to exchange ideas and information, learn from you, share our experiences. But I want to leave you with one last thought, one that I personally deeply believe in. And that is that healthcare, we can do so much more than just meeting the expectations that patients have and meeting expectations that other sectors have already delivered on. We can deliver to patients what they expect and deserve in the most important aspects of their lives, their health. And I thank you for your time, and I wish you and your patients a great ride down the ever-changing river of healthcare. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kraz, for a very informative and enjoyable presentation. We will now begin the Q&A portion of the program. As a reminder, you can submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. Dr. Kraz will attempt to answer as many questions as he can during the time we have for Q&A, and will follow up on questions he does not have the opportunity to address. Our first question from the audience is, you talk about how walling off patients doesn't work. Why do you think that is, and how do health systems instill loyalty in their patients?
Yeah, great question. Thank you very much. I think trying to constrain choice was a valid strategy back when it was so difficult for the patient to know what else is out there. The internet has changed this paradigm for all of us in every aspect of our life. And so we need to acknowledge that we can no longer form the patient's expectations. We have to fulfill them. And that's why I think the most successful health systems don't try and put their energy into building walls. They're putting their energy into building welcome mats that make the patient want to come to them instead of finding it hard to leave. And so there's an enormous opportunity out there. We have seen how ZocDoc itself scaled up with essentially no marketing budget, just through word of mouth, through an experience that compelled patients to come back. And we've seen this work for our health system partners as well.
Thank you. Our next question is, can you identify some of the patient challenges that your clients have faced and examples of how you've helped them?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, one of the things that we do, even ahead of us necessarily working with a client, is that we perform what we call an access audit, which is really a fancy name for mystery shopping. So we'll have a team that will use a client's channels, be it the website, the phone, whatever channels you provide your patients, and we'll record what it's like to get access to one of your doctors based on these channels. And we have seen many things in the scope of that, from incorrect phone numbers to very long hold times, to doctors that have no availability, or sort of a first experience that greets the patient with bureaucracy versus fulfilling a patient need from the get-go. And I think in many ways it's important to understand and to benchmark yourself where you're falling down. And I think then making an intelligent decision on how to remedy that is part of a very individual process that systems go through. But it's always a very rewarding experience to see the patient concerns being addressed over time, and the positive feedback, net promoter scores, and general satisfaction scores that can be achieved with that.
Thanks so much. We have another question from our audience. The patient adoption increases are impressive. How much is due to the increase in the number of physicians on the service? Is there some sort of data that shows median same doc increases year to year?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So our patient growth has always outpaced our doctor growth. So at least the average number of patients per doctor is increasing month over month, right? Median, the absolute numbers probably takes a little bit longer than that, but it's an experience that constantly gets better, and that's self-reinforcing. Doctors can actually offer our service to all of their patients. The way we work with them is to even create experiences that can be branded by the provider and extend the benefits of a 21st century booking experience to everyone they already have a relationship with. So to answer the question succinctly, the patients are growing faster than the doctors. Doctors are getting more patients as time progresses, and I think we've seen great synergies working with our partners to even accelerate that trend.
Thanks, Dr. Kraz. We have another question from the audience. What are the low-hanging opportunities that we are missing out on in hospitals in using technology?
So it varies hospital system by hospital system. Obviously, making sure that you have the pieces that you can actually get adoption for is crucial. One of the things that I experienced in my time before I joined ZocDoc was that there are many good technologies out there that people just don't use. And one of the crucial pieces that we've been taking very seriously at ZocDoc from day one is not to approach this with a clinician or a provider's mindset, but to really try and reverse engineer how the patient thinks about that and what their mental model of a doctor in a hospital is. And so we have the benefit of being able to actually systematically test which version a patient actually prefers. And that can be very trivial things from, like, what should the color of this button be? Should this button be 5 pixels further down or to the right? To what should the text be? Should it submit, save, continue? To how should this procedure actually be called? What will the patient be able to recognize? How do we make it easy for them to navigate this? And systematically thinking about getting your technology adopted is, I think, one of the key factors for success.
Thank you. Here's the next question from our audience. How does price enter into the patient experience?
So the patient, it's a very insightful question. I didn't spend a lot of time during the presentation, but one of the crucial enablers for ZocDoc to be successful is actually the ability for the patient to filter the doctors by insurance participation. Patients need to know that. They cannot and they will not make a decision for a doctor without that information, and it's something that is front and center. And again, it's a very complicated subject, and we had many years of learning on how to present that accurately and make it intuitive, for the patient and deliver the correct results at the same time. But absolutely, this is a very important question. Insurance coverage is a must-have.
Thanks, Dr. Kraz. Another audience member would like to know, how do you get busy physicians to give up control over their schedules to use ZocDoc booking?
Yeah, so it's frequently at this point. I mean, let me travel back in time. In the beginning, it was very hard. And truthfully, for a number of reasons, obviously we were unknown. And also, it was actually very hard to create a great patient experience. Today, it's very different because doctors hear it from their peers, and more importantly, they hear it from the patient. An experience that actually works delights the patient before they even come in, and they will compliment the doctor on giving access in a path that is unusual still in healthcare, and that's therefore creating a lot of happiness on their end. And so we found that doctor peers and patients are our best evangelists in converting doctors to a technology that they wouldn't otherwise consider. Having said this, I think many doctors understand that this is really mainstream, and there are very many tangible benefits that come associated with that. One of them being that we allow patients to leave reviews, but only those patients that have actually booked through ZocDoc, right? And you then get a very different result than if you only get the patient that, quite frankly, didn't have the best experience to seek out a site to leave feedback. We are sampling, and we get between 10 and 20% of the patients to actually pay it forward and leave reviews on the doctors. And these reviews are overwhelmingly positive, right? Both from a pure star rating and also in the qualitative things that are being written about the doctor. And these reviews are being used nearly for a pre-meeting, which gives the patient a good sense of what a doctor is like, and the patient will self-select to a doctor that they will enjoy working with, which truthfully doctors end up enjoying a lot themselves. So there's a element of online reputation management that doctors value a lot, and there is a patient self-selection element to the doctors that they click with that doctors really learn to enjoy.
Thank you. And as a reminder to our audience, we're still taking questions. You could submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and hitting Send. Our next question is, in the society in which I live, getting appointments is pretty fast. The patient doesn't have to wait long for an appointment on appointment day. There is usually considerable waiting, 3 to 4 hours. What strategies could be adopted to reduce waiting time?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm sorry.
Please go ahead. Was the question complete?
There was one more part. It says, which actually creates a lot of discomfort to patients.
Right. So here's a possible explanation for very long waiting times. Some doctors feel they have to overbook because they do experience the 20% last-minute cancellations, no-show, reschedules, and they don't want to see the time go unutilized. One of the benefits of booking patients online and giving them the ability to book in the next 24 hours is that the cancellation and no-show rate is dimensionally different from what you get when you ask them to book 3 weeks in advance, because no one knows what they're actually going to do 3 weeks from today. I'm pretty organized, and I can tell you what I'll do 3 weeks from now. And so forcing them to think that far ahead actually creates that high no-show and cancellation rate, where opening up your calendar and allowing people to book for the next 24 to 72 hours has a no-show cancellation rate an order of magnitude smaller, and therefore you don't have to overbook to the same degree, and you don't create the same long wait times. And that in itself is a huge patient satisfier.
Thanks so much. The next question from our audience is, how do you make your practice more tech-savvy when a large portion of patients are older and not tech-savvy?
So, my first reaction would be, don't underestimate the seniors. They've been trained by Expedia and Orbitz and all these things, to book things online. You just ask them how they get their airplane tickets, and you'll be surprised to find that they actually use web services to do that. And we find something very similar on ZocDoc. there is certainly a large segment of active seniors that will use us to book their appointments. And the other interesting thing that we are finding is actually that for patients that might be even older than that, you find our generation taking care of their parents and really appreciating online tools to make our hectic work days a little bit easier by booking the appointment for mom or dad after hours when I actually get around to doing it.
Thanks, Dr. Karaz. That's an interesting point. The next question from our audience is, can you speak about the impact on health systems SEO benefits after partnering with ZocDoc?
Yeah, one of the biggest dissatisfiers for Google is when patients click on your website and immediately click back to the search results because they just don't find it very useful. And that is really the element that we are tackling. You want to create an experience where at the first glance, it's clear to the patient that they're getting something valuable here. And being able to show them like the real-time appointment times, what they're really after, is a huge step in this direction. And not to get too technical, I think our team would be happy to address this. There's a number of ways how this can be delivered from a web services perspective. And that's a more detailed discussion that might be good for a more specialized topic. But it's absolutely possible, and you are better off giving them something that they perceive as being valuable to capture them and make sure they don't just hit that back button.
Thank you. Here's the next question from our audience. Meeting and exceeding today's patient expectations is certainly dependent on what they're looking for in terms of immediacy, choice, and personalization. However, it also has a lot to do with how they feel when they leave your office. What data do you have on how patients rate the practice when they don't get what they want at the time of the visit, despite hitting a home run in terms of immediacy, choice, and personalization? They can still rate you poorly and do so on websites, spread negative PR despite the healthcare provider doing the most appropriate thing for patients from a medical standpoint.
So, look, I think you will never be able to completely eliminate all the people, all the time. And truth be told, people understand that how to read reviews online. Like people are trained by Amazon and what other websites, that there's always someone who leaves, pardon my French, a cookie review, right? And that's fine if it's embedded within the general set of reviews that you're getting from patients that come back to you over and over again because they like the care that they're getting. And this is exactly the experience that you get at ZocDoc, where we poll all the patients that book through the platform, and we get feedback from a large portion of it, versus leaving it to the few that were truly dissatisfied to find a review site somewhere else on the web and leave reviews for you. So I think the best way to combat the few disenchanted patients is to actually give a voice to all the other patients that love the service that you're providing.
Thanks so much. We still have more time for questions, so if anyone in the audience has any more questions, you can type them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and click Send. Right now we have another question from the audience. What tech choices can be provided for inpatients?
What tech choices can be provided as part of ZocDoc? So we are focused on patients that sort of patient universe, but I'm happy to say that we've started to work with some existing clients to have a much broader offering. And so if you currently work with us, please contact your ZocDoc representative, and we'd be happy to walk you through that. But it's right now reserved to our existing client base.
Thank you. The last question we have time for today is, what's next? How does ZocDoc continue to evolve with consumers and meet patient expectations?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question to end on. So we are constantly evolving our consumer offering with dozens of features that we actually test every week through these A/B tests where we can show different variants. At the same time, we're running some geographic tests with bigger features expansion, and we'll announce those as they roll out nationally. But one thing that I'm very excited about is, in particular, the way we work with health systems are some of these pilots that I just mentioned, where we are working with hospitals to bring the ZocDoc experience, to all of their patients and all of their doctors, and that's a great new frontier to make sure that even more patients have the experience that they deserve and should get in healthcare. Thanks so much.
I want to again thank Dr. Karaz for his excellent presentation and for all of you for participating today. We look forward to having you join us for future webinars. This concludes today's program. Have a wonderful afternoon.